Back to the daily grind, and shout out to the full-time patrons. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
Let Dana White tell it. UFC 227 is stacked. Holy smokes. Dana White, El Jefe, the UFC president, has came out, and today we heard about multiple fights, all for UFC 227, some in the works, and now this one looking like a done deal between Yair Rodriguez and Zabit Magomedsharipov, two of the UFC's brightest prospects as far as the featherweight division is concerned. Both of these guys are highly touted. Now, Yair Rodriguez, you know, the fans definitely pumped the brakes a little bit on him in his last fight versus Frankie Edgar, where it was a real test for Yair Rodriguez. And leading up to that point, there was a lot of hype surrounding Yair Rodriguez. You know, he's a very exciting striker, but as is the case with a lot of very exciting strikers, when you go against one of the best grapplers, one of the best fighters in the division, you can get somewhat exposed. I mean, we saw this somewhat in the Francis Ngannou-Stipe Miocic fight. Francis Ngannou, a lot of hype going into the fight, been knocking a lot of dudes out, you know, looking really exciting. But whenever you get a guy that puts together that smart game plan and, you know, kind of, you know, uses that to their advantage, whether it's to out grapple you. In Stipe Miocic's case, you know, he wanted to take advantage of Francis Ngannou's cardio as well. But in Frankie Edgar's case, he could just, you know, try and take advantage of Yair Rodriguez on the ground in a grappling situation and take him into deep water. So we saw that, and it definitely did not go Yair Rodriguez's way. It went the opposite of Yair's way. He got dominated in the fight, and his face was pretty busted up after the fight by Frankie Edgar, and I don't think he's been back to fight since then. Now, with that being said, Yair Rodriguez looked amazing in his last performance at UFC 223 against Kyle Bochniak. Yair, I mean, and it took two to tango. You ain't got to be scared to get your ass whooped. That's the saying for that fight, because Kyle Bochniak brought it to that fight. He was a very exciting piece of that fight. He brought the energy all 3 rounds. He was losing all 3 rounds. I mean, Zabit going into the fight sustained a hand injury and was still doing all type of cartwheel kicks and just craziness. Zabit's last fight was insane versus Kyle Bochniak. He won the fight pretty dominantly, but it was also a really exciting fight. So now Zabit's got a lot of hype himself. Now it's Yair Rodriguez versus Zabit, so that's going to be a great fight. Zabit's been waiting for this fight, wanting this fight for a while now. We heard about ever since his win over Kyle Bochniak, like there was talks of Zabit waiting at the Performance Institute, trying to like run into Yair, you know, and approach him about a fight. Not like right there, you know, face to face, fisticuffs, but like, hey, I would like to fight you. I think it'd be a good fight. What do you think? But he waited at the UFC Performance Institute for a few hours, or a couple of hours, never ran into Yair Rodriguez. Since then, there was talks of Yair Rodriguez's team possibly looking for a fight earlier than UFC 227, but the UFC looks like they got the deal done to get Zabit versus Yair at UFC 227. Now, keep in mind one interesting thing. What does this mean for the UFC coming to Russia, right? This is UFC's targeting going to Russia like September 15th, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of people thought Zabit might be on that card. I mean, if it's going to be in the Olympic Stadium over in Russia, then you're going to need a super card. And you would think you'd have like Habib, maybe, Yair, not Yair, Habib Nurmagomedov, Zabit Magomedsharipov. I mean, there's some pretty big stars coming up that are Russian fighters. Alexander Volkov coming up, another dude. So with that being said, if it's going to be a pay-per-view, you'd think you'd have to bring the big names to that UFC 228 card, if that's going to be a pay-per-view. But there's some talks about the timing of UFC in Russia, you know, so there's some people that think it probably has to be a free card. But if you're even going to have a free card in Russia, which that would still be big for the UFC going to Russia, but that would mean they're probably not going to go to the Olympic Stadium, right? You know, for some free card, especially if you're not going to have Zabit or Habib on it. Who knows though? We'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. This is going to be a great fight no matter where it happens. Yair Rodriguez versus Zabit Magomedsharipov. But right now it's looking like it's going to be happening at UFC 227, which we found out the UFC is targeting George St. Pierre versus Nate Diaz, Alexander Gustafsson versus Luke Rockhold. And in the fights that are already official for that card, you got TJ Dillashaw versus Cody Garbrandt, the rematch, Derek Brunson versus Antonio Carlos Jr. So, as of right now, looking at UFC 227, it's got the potential to be a monster card if everything Dana White has planned comes to fruition. But I have to also say to keep this in mind. If you remember at the very beginning of the year, there was talks of 3 champion versus champion super fights at UFC 226, right? Demetrius Johnson versus TJ Dillashaw, Amanda Nunes versus Chris Cyborg, Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic, and those all didn't necessarily come to fruition. It's still going to be a great card, but it's not all of those, and that could happen here at UFC 227. If you think about the fights, George St. Pierre versus Nate Diaz, that one's kind of out of left field, you know what I'm saying? Like, it would be a cool fight. Maybe, to me, it seems like a bad matchup for Nate Diaz, but hey, maybe he just wants a payday at this point. I haven't heard any stories of Nate Diaz running out of money, but if he is, George St. Pierre is probably for sure the next biggest payday to Conor McGregor. But with that being said, Nate Diaz, he hasn't fought for a couple of years. Also, GSP coming down to 155. That's going to be new. So there's a lot of pieces that have to come together for Nate Diaz versus GSP. Once it becomes official, if the UFC ever officially announces Nate Diaz versus GSP, I'll probably get a little more hype for that fight. But to me, that just seems pretty hard to put together. But we'll see what happens with Nate Diaz versus GSP. To me, that might be a fight, you know, that sounds really good, but I don't know if it's going to come together. But we'll see what happens. The UFC, you know, the UFC's coming to the Staples Center in LA. UFC 227, Garbrandt versus Dillashaw 2. Looking like now we've got Yair Rodriguez versus Zabit Magomedsharipov. Not announced on UFC.com, but according to Dana White, who spoke with Lance Pugmire of the LA Times, it's a done deal. So with that being said, I'll keep you guys updated with the UFC 227 card. Looks like it's going to be a monster card. Now, UFC 224 is this weekend. 225, stacked. 2 title fights. Covington versus RDA, Whitaker versus Romero. You've got CM Punk, of course, returning on UFC 225, but that's not one of the bigger fights. It's just one of the ones that sticks out. Curtis Blades versus Alistair Overeem. You got another heavyweight fight at UFC. UFC 225 is going to be big, top to bottom. UFC 226, of course, champion versus champion. Cormier versus Miocic going down. That's the Slug Festival. Mike Perry versus Yancy Medeiros. You got Derek Lewis versus Francis Ngannou. I mean, then we go to UFC 227. We already Dillashaw. I mean, UFC 225, 226, 227. It's about to be crazy. Then we'll see where UFC 228 is. There's a potential for that being in Russia. We'll see if it's going to be a free card or UFC 228 in Russia. But if it's UFC 228 in Russia in the Olympic Stadium in Moscow, that's going to be nuts. And then, of course, UFC, I mean, it's the rest of the year is probably just going to pick up for it. So it's a great time to be an MMA fan. And this fight right here, Yair Rodriguez versus Zabit Magomedsharipov, there's going to be a whole lot of ninja shit no matter where that takes place. So with that being said, it is what it is. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments. I'm out. And as always, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell right next to it so you're notified every time I upload a video. I'm out.
Da 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 da. It's the motherfucking DOG.